Bonjour à tous et ravi de faire votre connaissance. Vous avez été nombreux à nous suivre cette semaine à l'occasion du premier épisode de notre toute nouvelle série de Résidence Instagram. Merci de tout cœur pour votre soutien. J'aimerais donc partager avec vous mon entrevue virtuelle avec Emmanuel, où ensemble nous sommes revenus sur les concepts et les mots-clés qui inspirent sa pratique. Cette discussion vous est offerte en anglais, la langue courante de l'artiste, et sous-titrée en français. Alors profitez-en et au plaisir de vous revoir bientôt. So hi, Emmanuel.
Hey, Nemka.
I hope you're doing well. Really, thank you for joining me in this friendly conversation today. Throughout the week, you've been quite amazing at sharing your current work and inspiration with us, and I thought it would be interesting for our followers, but also for myself, I guess, to come back on this experience and have an opportunity to look a bit more in depth on what you said during this Instagram takeover, and where your practice is taking you moving forward. In the context of a global pandemic as well. Yeah. But before we begin, and I think particularly because we both have made Canada, our new home, I also would like to take the time to really honor the chance that has been given to us, and to be grateful to the people and the relationships that we are building, I guess, on this land. I stand here in Aylmer at Limagier, on unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people, and you're joining me from Guelph, which is also part of the Anishinaabe territory. And so, despite of being, so far away from each other, not so far away, but far away from each other, I just wanted to, recognize this connection. And so the connection we share, and maybe the importance of, keeping an open mind, continue nurturing curiosity for one another, and really at the end of the day, just enjoy learning together.
Yeah.
And with that said, I will just dive in the thick of it. So like I said, these past few days, you've shared with us your current work. And really, again, I thank you for that, because I think we can all relate, how vulnerable one might feel when sharing a work in progress. But I'd like to hear more about your idea around the garden and its cyclical form and stages, almost as a metaphor to life, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. I've been thinking about the garden for probably about 4 years now. Like it's sort of been a part of the way I've been thinking about my work, and just like you said, like I've been using the garden as a metaphor, like trying to use it as a space to discuss, or to actually not even necessarily to discuss, but just to think through issues around like basically, simply put, hope. Like to kind of bring it simply a little bit is like, I feel like I'm trying to make sense of the world, trying to make sense of the world that I live in today, trying to make sense of the societies that I'm a part of, like living in Canada, and all the history that's embedded in that. And I find there's this sort of duality where you basically, like, hope feels kind of two-sided. On the one hand, there's the hope, and on the other hand, there's reality.
Yeah.
The reality of, pain or violence or grief or failure, all of that. So to sort of simplify it, it's sort of like beauty or hope in contrast with the reality of pain or grief. And the garden has kind of become this sort of interesting metaphorical space to think through that, because a garden is, on a surface level, really beautiful. It's a place that's very inviting. It functions as sort of like a sanctuary. But the reality of a garden is that, like, things die. Things are in competition for space. In order to establish a garden, there's a fair bit of violent construction that goes into bringing about this beauty. So yeah, I've just sort of, that space has become really like, not to be punny, but like it's a fertile space to think about these sort of contrasting ideas, how these two things exist at the same time in our lives.
And so, I mean, you talk about the notion of hope. I think that's very interesting, considering we can't really ignore the context we're currently in.
Totally.
And I'm curious to know how this pandemic has, I would say, impacted your practice on a daily basis, I guess, because you started this series before the pandemic. So how has it influenced your state of mind in terms of creativity?
Yeah, and that's why I was really excited to share the collages, because so the pandemic really, like, the first lockdown happened in March. I think we're almost a year into it now.
Yeah.
And right now I'm currently working on my master's degree, and we had to leave our studios. Like, the whole university was shut down. You couldn't do your research anymore because we weren't really sure what was happening. So I was actually out of my studio from March of 2020 to September of 2020. And before this, I was making these sort of large scale paintings of gardens. And I couldn't do it anymore because I didn't have access to my studio. And I couldn't paint the way I paint in my apartment. And so things really slowed down. And so the first thing was I had to really slow down, and I had to really think about my work in terms of the fact that, like, I didn't know when I was going to get back into the studio. So then what happens if you can't practice the same way you've been practicing for almost, like, I've always had a studio, or at least I've had a studio for the past 4 years. So there was a lot of uncertainty, and to be quite honest, there was a little bit of like futility maybe, because not only was I not able to work in my studio, galleries were also closed.
Yeah.
And you're sort of looking into this wide abyss, and you don't really know, what's the point of making art if no one's even going to see it. So there was that sort of mix of futility, but then the collages actually emerged out of this. Okay, I can't work large scale. I had all these source images that were sort of the source images for my paintings, and I had to work on a much smaller scale and really think a bit more intentionally of the kind of space I was creating. And so the collages became this really intimate way for me to think about my practice, and for me to think about what does it look like to make work in the midst of all this uncertainty. So the collages kind of functioned like a proposition. Like, if I make a painting, what could that painting look like? And that's sort of how the collages emerged. So yeah, the pandemic has been it's been interesting to practice in the midst of this. Like, every job, I guess, is really interesting these days to think about, okay, what is the most significant part of the work? And also, like, why do we keep doing it, even in the midst of whatever uncertainties there are?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I feel that, what we're going through as individual, but also as a collective, obviously, is really teaching us to think about, what's important to us, after all, and what remains when you strip away, or I guess when things in this case are taken from you. So things that were part of your daily routine and that you expected, and then you come to realize that they were either completely superficial or in some cases really essential.
Yeah.
And so I'll tell you, to me, what's what we're missing the most is that human connection. I think it's the biggest loss for us.
Yeah.
It's this, distinctive ability that we have to feel for each other and to, experience empathy, I guess, and I find that really difficult to happen when you're not in contact. And I mean, really physically, not virtually, even through
Yeah.
screen.
Yeah.
Um, and and so somehow I wonder how maybe that might have, led your interest for material curiosity. You talk about material curiosity and you call that compositional viewpoints. This idea of creating an immersive experience of the garden, as if it was a way to feel something maybe, or to have a better grasp of the situation, looking at things from different angles, or maybe just a way to cope with the situation, which is, I want to take the control back.
Yeah.
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 So what do you feel about that?
Yeah, a lot of what I've been thinking about is sort of like, which it relates to this idea that we can't really be in physical proximity to each other as much anymore. But I really wanted to make the spaces inviting. Like with the collages, it's sort of like thinking about this experience you have in a garden, not necessarily even the representation of the garden, but the experience of being in a garden where, you're looking at one plant, but you can feel the sun on your skin. You can feel the wind moving by, and sort of my hope is to sort of create these images that help the viewer sort of embody it, because probably one of the things, I don't know if this is too cheesy to think about, but my hope is that, like I create this garden space and I experience it while I make it. Like with my material curiosity, I make this thing, but then I share it, and then other people can, even though we're not physically in the same space, but they can look at the same image and hopefully experience the same way, experience the same thing. And then in a way, maybe we're sharing the space together, So it's interesting to me making these gardens and like thinking about creating a space that you can invite people into, and thinking about how that's different now, and how that'll be in the future, like what happens right now. We're looking at these images on our screens, but what happens when, someone actually gets to see these things in physical form? How does that experience change? Yeah.
Well, so you talk about inviting others into your circle, and you've also made some references to contemporary poetry and how it inspires your work. So I wonder, have poetry or literary works always helped you in your creative process? And maybe you can share a little bit about the power of words and how they can generate impactful images.
Totally. I've always, so my relationship with literature and like poetry especially is almost like one of envy, where I'm so jealous at the poet's ability to put things into words that I can't, And then I think I'm like, okay, that's why I'm a visual artist. I can create these sort of visual propositions that maybe function the same way a poem would function. But, so like I brought up Ross Gay this week, and Ross Gay has this book called The Book of the Lights. And, thinking back about this idea of holding both hope and the reality of our present situation in both hands, and being able to not have not like a naive escapism where you're like, everything's fine and there's no problem, but being able to say, wow, these things are really hard, but these things are also very beautiful. That's the Book of Delights. So he wrote this book. Over the course of a year, he challenged himself to write an essay every day where he noticed something in his everyday life that he chose to delight in. He chose to say, you know what, that thing's pretty cool. Or sometimes that thing really sucks.
Yeah.
And I can delight in the fact that I know it. And in many ways, I feel like that's what I'm trying to do with my work, is like hold two things at once, or Maya Angelou's Still I Rise, which is such a beautiful poem that talks about adversity, but it doesn't center around the adversity the person is facing. Actually, the poem centers around the strength of the individual in the midst of adversity. So it holds both things at once. It's not naive, and it's also not this is when I wish I was a poet, because I can't find the right word, but it's not totally pessimistic either.
Yeah.
It's there's hope in the fact that like the individual has the ability to face the adversity. So in many ways, the poems do what I try to do in my paintings, in my artwork. Yeah.
Well, you talk about choices, big life decisions. So, maybe I'm going to take you in a different direction. Maybe not so far, but I'd like to I'd like for you to tell me a bit more about that spark for art, that moment of decision. Do you recall the time or times, because there can be several moments, where you told yourself, or maybe I should say, where you knew that art was going to be a big part of your life?
Yeah, totally. There are sort of like two significant moments. There are two significant moments for me. Probably the first moment was in around grade 11, so in high school. I had an art teacher who is a terrific painter. His name is Zeno Orara. He's a Nigerian painter, and he was my teacher in high school. And the thing that made me curious about art, the first thing was he loved painting. I don't think I had seen another adult who loved what they did to the point. Like, he was always painting. He was always thinking about painting. He would show me paintings and be like, notice how they did this. Look at this. Look at this. Oh my gosh, that's so amazing. And at that point I was like, no, it's not that cool. Like, it's just a painting. But the thing that I was drawn to was his passion. Like, he loved it so much. And so then I started making art because he was a good friend. And then B, I was curious. I was like, okay, like, if he likes it so much, maybe I can like it so much. And then what that led to was me sort of discovering that, like, I could play. Like, being an artist, to me, as like, yes, there are conceptual issues and there are critical issues that an artist is thinking about and that I'm thinking about. But for me, primarily, it's about play. Like, the processes involved in making a work of art can be quite playful, and you sort of surprise yourself. And there's a lot of fun involved in it, which led me to the second experience, which was when I was in university taking my first art classes. And I had instructors really just encouraged me to play. Like, it wasn't about drawing the thing and making sure it looked exactly like what you were seeing. It was about having fun and playing. And I think those two experiences combined just sort of like sparked this like love of making, love of being in the studio, of trying things out, of saying, okay, what happens if I put this beside this, and surprise.
Experimenting.
Yeah.
So if you could give one piece of advice to the person you were when you first chose the arts as a career, then what would it be?
Ooh, that's a hard question. That's a hard question.
Well, you said you kind of half answered that by being playful, so experimenting.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you would?
Probably I would tell myself that it's also hard. I would tell myself to brace myself.
Yeah.
I think when you start making art, on the one hand, there's all the play and there's all the fun, but establishing a practice is also quite difficult as an emerging artist. And I think I've been really encouraged by the more mature artists that I know who are honest about it, who say, no, this is tough. You might not get that exhibition, you might not get that grant, but stick with it. Stick with it, don't give up. I think that would help. Yeah.
So, I mean, we know each other from having both lived in Edmonton, Alberta, and I know that you're a part of a group exhibition called The Scene. You were talking about being an emerging artist. Can you tell us more about it, and maybe what's in the pipeline for you moving forward?
Yeah, so the exhibition at the Art Gallery of Alberta goes on till August. It got extended
Okay.
because of the present lockdowns, and so we're hoping that at some point it'll be feasible for people to actually go into the gallery and see the works. It's a great show. Probably the thing I love the most about it is that many of my friends are also in the show. Like people I went to art school with are in the show. It makes me miss Edmonton a lot to think about the fact that like the work is there, but I'm not there, and my friends are there. So yeah, I'm hoping that people will get to see it soon, and also I think they're planning on posting images online soon, so then people at Les Magés might also be able to see the works as well.
Cool.
And then other than that, really, I am scheduled to finish my master's in August. And so right now I'm basically just sort of like focused on getting my thesis exhibition planned out and executed and graduating. Trying to finish school.
Yeah, and keep practicing. Well, listen, thank you so much for this conversation. I really enjoyed our chat, and I truly hope that that time spent together, though through screens, will spark some interesting conversations around us. I would simply invite our followers, really, who are keen on knowing more about your work, to first of all refer to the takeover, the Instagram takeover. All the publications are there, but also to visit your website at osahorart.com, and we'll put a mention of it in the caption of the video. But until next time, please be safe, stay curious, and then stay in touch.
Yeah.
All right. Bye.
Bye.